Good morning.
Good morning.
So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people here this morning. And all of you guys, 12 of you. So that's a pretty good house for Ocean Gate. I wanted to tell you about the other 3 visitors we have. We have this little guy. You see that person? This is one of the little hungry ghosts who's coming today to Ocean Gate. I don't know. I think maybe I don't know if he's greed, hate, or delusion. You decide. Here's another one. This guy's definitely just grumpy. Here he is. Okay, can see him. Whoa! Then this guy's like, what the? This guy is like angry. He kind of looks online. He sort of like he's kind of laughing, I guess, but he's not. He's not a happy man. Maybe it's a woman. Green. Okay. So these folks are visiting as well. I'm going to put them on the altar later. So as you may have already guessed, today is our day for celebrating Segaki, feeding the hungry ghosts ceremony. And I just start out by saying that Segaki, say, means to give alms, to conduct educational work. I looked this up in the dictionary. To carry something out, administer first aid, apply bandages, and perform a medical operation. So that's kind of what we're doing. We're offering first aid, psychological first aid to the hungry ghosts we're calling forth in this ceremony. And then Gaki refers to the realm of the hungry ghosts. So the Gaki is a hungry ghost itself, a disquieted spirit. And then Gakido is the specific realm of the 6 realms of the hungry, and the hungry ghost is one of those 6 realms. The hungry ghost by itself is sometimes talked about as being the devil, a demon. Spirits of the dead are just a ghost. But here's the thing about hungry ghosts. The story about hungry ghosts that I thought I want to talk about today is this. So first of all, the 6 realms are the realm of the gods or the devas, the asuras, who are really jealous of the devas, because the devas have the kind of karma where they get to go and have like the absolutely perfect life. No problems. And then the downside to that is that you use up all your merit. So when you come out of the other side of the Deva realm, you down to, maybe you get to be human, which is actually a good thing, because in the human realm, that's the only realm which you can become realized. So being a human is a good thing. Don't waste this life. But the Asuras, who are the kind of next level down or next level over, they're really jealous of the Devas, so they're always picking fights. So we often talk about them as being Titans or the anger realm. And then we have the humans. Humans live on average about 100 years. Humans have the possibility of a realization because we have the only kind of karmic situation in which we can wake up to our delusion. And then we have the hell realms the animal realm. And while I know in the United States we may feel like being reborn as a dog or a cat is a really swell, cushy life, maybe even the life of the Devas, the problem with the animal realm is that animals have no control over their lives, and not having the consciousness to be able to make transformation. So being born in the animal realm from the perspective of realization is not optimal. And then the hell realms, and there are several of them, and the hungry ghosts fall into that realm. Now the story about the hungry ghosts is that hungry ghosts, as I think most of us know, they have big stomachs, teeny tiny little straw-like necks, and usual size head, and they are insatiably thirsty or hungry. They're always looking for something. Kind of like being caught in greed or anger or delusion. It's kind of like being a human being. So we can think of the six realms as states of mind. So we all experience these states of minds at various times. This is how I want to talk about hungry ghosts today. Anyway, hungry ghosts have these little teeny tiny necks, and whenever they get close to something like a river or whatever that looks like it's going to sate their hunger, it turns into either fire or pus. So it becomes this really disgusting thing, and so it doesn't help. There's another story about hungry ghosts that when they're brought food, they have these super long chopsticks, and that they're so long that you can't use the chopstick to pick up the food and get it into your mouth. But it never occurs to the hungry ghost to feed it to feed each other. And so that's another problem that hungry ghosts have. Whoop. They also have the problem of waterworks. So you can either understand this as a place, an actual place of rebirth, which is one way that is taught in Buddhism, or you can understand this as the realms that we get caught in, mental realms. So I want to talk about how we are all hungry ghosts. We all have that kind of hungry ghost aspect to ourselves. And that we often engage in activities that we think are going to make us happy, but they actually bring us suffering. Like maybe you spend too much money on your credit card and you think, oh, that's really going to make me happy. I remember my first credit card. It used to be that they send you credit cards in the mail, and you just had to activate them and you could use them. And they don't do that anymore, and I think for good reason. Anyway, I think like a lot of us, I probably spent too much money on my credit card before I realized that, oh, you have to actually pay for this. This isn't like just some kind of free thing that came in the mail. So I thought I would make myself happy by buying some stuff that maybe I wanted, and luckily I had enough money and enough income to be able to pay it off. But I did realize at that point that credit cards could be a real source of suffering, as opposed to bringing about happiness. So this hungry ghost notion that we are engaged in responses that we think are going to make us happier, that we think we want something or we don't want something, or we want to continue something that's already going on, that when we get attached to that, that is the kind of classic definition in Buddhism of suffering. So then we engage in these activities that we believe consciously or unconsciously will bring us happiness that don't. Like, for example, we think that being angry is going to push away our suffering, or that greed is going to bring us something that will assuage our suffering, or that being self-defending is going to maintain our self-esteem and thereby make us happier. So the end result of all of these ways of thinking, all of these kinds of delusion, is that we are usually suffering and that we do not usually experience happiness. Yet, interestingly enough, habitually enough, we continue to do these patterns over and over again, seeking happiness in the wrong places. So this is our river of water that turns into pus and fire. And as Vicki talked about in her last lecture in early September, she talked about how this is a kind of way in that we create these sort of ways of responding often in childhood. I like to think of them as hidden matrices of pattern behavior, because we don't really know when we're kids kind of how the world works. And even if you're not actively, you're not being abused or something like that, oftentimes as kids, we have a kind of logic that it makes sense to us, but in reality, it doesn't really fit the situation. So what happens is that we create this idea, I have a hidden matrix in which we create these ways of responding. They become habitual, but they're not really very workable. And in Western psychology, we often say these are coping strategies from trauma or just ignorance, I think, as children that we have about how the adult world functions. And then often the strategies are formed before we have the maturity to our life experience to analyze whether or not they're actually effective. So then they become, again, this hidden matrix of habitual responses. And we go to these responses without even thinking about it. We don't even realize that we're kind of being pushed around by these mindsets. So in the West, we might go to therapy to deconstruct the patterns that aren't working for us. We might do some variation of sort of East-West psychology or Western-Eastern mashup, if you will, of techniques to work with this, hoping that we're going to create a kind of emotional ease, or that we're going to learn better ways to function in our world, and that we hope to alleviate our suffering in this way. And these methods do work, and they're not antithetical to Buddhist teaching. So in Buddhism, we also have many strategies for training and working with these kinds of emotions. And to work with the responses in our daily life and the conditioning and the situations that we encounter. So we have meditation practices. We take the precepts. We take refuge in Buddha and Dharma and Sangha. We practice the paramitas. And in Tibetan Buddhism, we have things like Lojong practices, visualizations, and really serious training and skillful means in the Tibetan traditions. And as I think I talked about in my last lecture, I studied Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva Way, which is a really wonderful book. So we also, of course, have these kinds of trainings in Soto Zen as well. So in all of these traditions, we interact with our teachers and with the Sangha. So that's where we kind of share the ground rules of what we're up to. So we can talk to each other using the same language, and we can work out our problems and try to cultivate our skillful means within the context of this family called Sangha. In Soto Zen, we also have a lot of this, as I said earlier, and we also have our own kind of meditation, shikantaza, or just sitting, zazen. So again, Vicki talked about a lot of these kinds of things in her last lecture. And zazen, I think, is an interesting phenomena for us because, was it Uchiyama Roshi who said zazen is good for nothing? I thought Jocko would use this in a lecture. I know she did earlier in the year. So I think it was Uchiyama Roshi who said zazen is good for nothing. And but actually, zazen can be very, very transformative, and in a quiet way. Doesn't look like much is going on from the outside, but there can be a lot going on in the inside. But in order for it to be transformative in this way, we have to pay attention to what's going on in our mind while we're sitting zazen. And when I say pay attention, I don't mean push around our mind, control our mind, or impose our idea upon ourselves about what we think we should be doing in zazen. Like, we're not sitting in zazen and saying to myself, to ourselves, oh, I'm terrible at this, I'm thinking, I'm in pain, I must be horrible, I hate this, how can I get out of here? Oh, I wish I could look at my watch, how much time is left? all those things that we go through, which by the way, we don't need to judge all that stuff. That's like, as human beings, that's what we do. We have all of this stuff going on in our heads. So there's this quality of just sitting in the midst of all of that. So this just sitting is what that just sitting is that, and paying attention to what's happening to us in a non-judgmental way. So we're not saying I'm having good zazen or bad zazen, or maybe you're just bored. That's another possibility. You're just sitting there and you're just bored. So that's why we say, let zazen do zazen. Let zazen do zazen. Blanche Hartman used to have this little song that she'd sing about her legs. She'd say, oh, my beautiful zazen legs, because she would just let her legs do zazen, and she didn't worry about what they were up to. And so she made up this little song, probably during zazen.
Lovely Zendonese.
Lovely Zendonese. So when I was at Tassajara, during the 4 years that I was there, I noticed pretty early on, because you spend a lot of time sitting zazen, I noticed that I had a pattern of what I was thinking about when I was sitting zazen. And I felt like this was this hidden matrix that was coming up. It was actually coming to the surface. And if I paid attention to what I was thinking, I could see what was going on in my head. And what I saw was that it was essentially a defensive posture that was happening in my head. So that is really helpful in zazen, to pay attention to what you're thinking about and to lightly pay attention to it. Again, it's not a judgmental thing. Because when you're just sitting there and these thoughts are just coming up and they're passing by, it gives you a good chance actually to see sort of what this hidden matrix is that's going on in your head. You know, what kind of little stories are you acting out in your head? What, you know, that. So in Approach to Zazen, Ajahn Roshi has a little diagram about zazen, and there's a straight line that's just totally being present. And below that, you see a little guy with Z's around his head, right, who's sleeping. And above that, you see all these little, you know, thought bubbles or fantasies or whatever. So this idea of just keep coming back, keep coming back. But, you know, these insights in zazen is not enough. It's really that, you know, zazen is a transformative experience, but it's not enough. We also have to pay attention to our interactions with other people as well. We have to ask ourselves, am I engaged in this same pattern over and over and over again? Do I do the same thing over and over again? And is that pattern serving me well, this thing that I'm doing? And how can I transform that pattern that's not very workable? And I encourage you to think of this as being not workable as opposed to bad, because bad goes to I am bad. None of us are bad. We just engage in activities that are not very workable. So to say, okay, this thing that I'm doing is not very workable, so how can I use my practice to transform this pattern or habitual way of responding? How can I transform this through my practice? How do I cultivate working with others in a way that's skillful and helpful? So from the perspective that I'm offering you, I would say that zazen in and of itself is not enough. And although we do zazen in groups, which in Sota Zen we do, which mirrors the mandala of the interconnectedness of all being, that's why we do the ceremonies the way we do them. That's why we sit zazen together. We can actually, as we're sitting zazen, though, we kind of roll up into our mind and we just hunker down into this very interior space while we're sitting zazen. But zazen is not just about you. It's about becoming aware of everything that's happening with you and around you in the context of each situation. So when you wake up, you are awake to your activity and the activity around you. Also, we can't rest on our laurels of our Zazen practice as an indication of our realization. So now I'm talking about the kind of Zazen. Some people sit down, and when they sit down, they go into a state in which they really feel good. So they're immediately go into a mental state of a kind of transcendent presencing where they may not even be aware of what's going on around them. They're in a kind of different mental state. And I have known people who felt like because they had those experiences in Zazen, it meant that they were a special practitioner, like they were really good Zen students. But having these kinds of special experiences in Zazen doesn't make you a good Zen student. What makes you, in my opinion, what makes you a good Zen student is that you learn to play well with others, that you cultivate skillful means, that we learn about what it is to be in this interactive event called our life. So we can be virtuosos of the cushion, although I gotta say, I don't necessarily think that that ability is necessarily being a virtuoso. In other traditions, it might be, but I would say in Soto Zen, not necessarily so. So, this harkens back to Chiambroshi saying, Zazen is good for nothing. It's not good for our ego. It's not an ego booster. It's not about God, I'm God's gift to Zazen. It's not about an ego downer. It's not about putting ourselves down. It's not about saying I'm a bad person. It's about calming back, learning how to be skillful with ourselves, learning how to be skillful with each other, just putting ourselves in that place, just keep coming back and keep coming back. So the place of realization, or the place in where we interact, where we enact Bodhisattva's way, from the perspective of Soto Zen, is in the midst of our life. It involves recognizing our hungry ghost. So Dogen describes this in Kuge, Flowers of Emptiness. He says, the fact that the time and the place in which the blue lotus flower, the Umadara flower, the blue lotus flower, which symbolizes the Bodhisattva's awakened mind, the awakened mind of a Bodhisattva. He says, the fact that the time and place in which the blue lotus flower blooms is within fire at the time of fire. This blooming of realization happens within fire at the time of fire. The Bodhisattva sits in the center of this blue lotus, which is on fire. This is the Saha world. The Bodhisattva practices in the middle of this lotus, this blue lotus of realization. He wrote, every flicker and blaze is a place and time where the blue lotus flower blooms. Every flicker and blaze, every unskillful action, every skillful action, every moment of our lives is this flicker and blaze of our life, this flicker and blaze of the Bodhisattva path, sitting in the middle of our life, in the middle of this being a hungry ghost, in the middle of the times when we are devas, in the middle of the times when we are asuras and we can't stand the devas, in the middle of the time that we are human beings, animals, dumbfounded by what's going on around us, totally confused. This Bodhisattva practice happens in the middle of all of that. He says, every flicker and blaze is a place and time where the blue lotus flower blooms. We should not fail to learn about within fire. We should not fail to learn about within fire. So do not discard your life. Do not turn away from the problems that you have. I was just reading a commentary about the Gensho Koan by a guy named Bokusan. He points out that delusion and realization are so close together, they are where our realization happens. Without delusion, there is no realization. Without realization, there is no delusion. And then there's something beyond this, which is just pure response, the bodhisattva response. But yet we are mostly caught in delusion and realization. But we cannot discard the delusion. If we discard the delusion, we discard realization. And that may not make sense, but that is sitting in the middle of this blue fire, this blue lotus of realization. This is the transformative crucible of bodhisattva practice. So sitting in the middle of the fire is seeing our own hungry ghost and making friends with it. Seeing our own hungry ghost and making friends with it. This hungry ghost, we may want to reject as delusion, but this hungry ghost is the very vehicle of our realization. We can't ride the chariot of realization without accepting the hungry ghost. So we have to make friends with this part of ourselves. We have to wake up within fire, or we have to wake up within the context of our world as hungry ghosts. If we don't acknowledge that, if we don't see that in ourselves and others, if we don't cultivate a workable, discerning, skillful, compassionate response to ourselves and others, we can't do this difficult work. We can't stay the course of our practice for ourselves and others, this bodhisattva practice. We can't continue our formal practice. So we need to accept who we are, all the bits and parts of who we are, that hidden matrix that isn't very workable, and try to make friends with that and say, that didn't work very well. Maybe we should try something else. Maybe that's part of my hidden matrix that's coming out that I didn't see before. Because often whenever there's like that thing going on, maybe there's something in there that we can look at. The Tibetans have a Lojong saying, drive all blame into one, which I have a little bit of a problem with, because it's like, if I understand this correctly, it's like all blame goes into one. Like, look at your own response, right? And we should do that. We should look at our own response. We should say to ourselves, what's my part in this? What's my hungry ghost up to? But again, not in a kind of punitive way in which we're beating ourselves up. It's a way of saying, what is it? What is it? What's happening here? What's workable? What's not workable? What's happening for the other person? This kind of gentle inquiry and transformation. Sometimes we have to be a little stern with ourselves, but we don't have to beat ourselves up about this. So we need to stay engaged, and also in order to stay engaged with even bigger problems in our world, I think we need this kindness. We need to be able to take care of ourselves in a certain way. Because I will say about the bigger issues in our life, global warming, for example, which, is probably the biggest existential crisis that we're facing. We're destroying our habitat and completely out of convenience. We really think that the things that we do, like having plastic containers for all of our food. When I was as a child, when I lived in Japan, and from 1959 to 62, 1959, the Japanese were still recovering from World War II. And I would go down to the local markets, and I had 100 yen, which I think is, I don't know how much it was worth at the time, but for me it was worth a lot because I could go down and buy all these little thingies down at the local village. But I remember that they always, the way they packaged the food was they had like old newspapers that they would glue the edges to and make a little bag. And so when you bought something, you know, like some nuts or something like that, you got this little bag, you know, made out of recycled newspaper. No plastic anywhere to be seen in 1959 that I remember in Japan. Now they're a culture where everything is super packaged, you know. So what's that about in our lives? You know, what's that about? I'm not going to answer that question here, but I think it's a good question for us to ask ourselves. What is this stuff about? So, but the bottom line here is we can't get discouraged. I was listening to Jane Goodall on TV the other night, and she was saying, we can't get discouraged. If we get discouraged, we're not going to keep working at this. And I was reading about that people who are younger often do get discouraged. They feel like, oh, this is like, I thought this was such an interesting thing that I read. Baby boomers are more likely not to get discouraged. We're more likely to say what Jane Goodall said, which is, what alternative do we have? You know, get to work. Let's get to work. And people who are younger are more likely to say, oh, geez, you know, it's all over. So even in the midst of it's all over, because I personally do think we've gotten to the point where it's going to be catastrophic. It already is there. But do we quit? Do we quit on ourselves? Do we quit on the hungry ghosts? Do we quit on the devas? Do we quit on the animals? Do we quit on the this or the that or the other thing because it's not workable? Because our hidden matrix is not apparent to us and we're engaged in all sorts of unworkable things? No. The whole Bodhisattva practice, again, I'll say this again, we live in the Saha world. This is the Buddha field of Shakyamuni Buddha. Our whole Bodhisattva practice is to hang in there. Keep asking, you know, what can I do? What can I do? How can I wake up to whatever this is? Even in the midst of not waking up. Actually, last night we were watching, and Dolores Fuente said the same thing. She said, don't stop. Don't stop. That's the one thing. I just kept plugging away at it with the people. It's great. And I didn't know this, you know. How does it go? Si se puede. Si se puede. Puede. Si se puede. Thank you. And Barack Obama said, I ripped that off, when he said, yes, we can, or yes, I can. Yeah. So you know, that's our Bodhisattva mantra, right? Yes, we can. We can keep at this. We can keep working at our own issues, and we can keep working at the broader issues at the same time. So the point of practice is that nothing is a lost cause. The point of this practice is to keep hanging in there for ourselves and for others. So today we're going to offer ritually sustenance to the hungry ghosts. We're going to have this ceremony. We're going to call all the hungry ghosts to us. And we have banners all the way around the room. Some of them are directly behind the altar, and they are the Tathagatas. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Buddhas that are going to come and hang out with us. And we have the 4 guardians on the 4 corners of the room, the 4 guardian kings. This is magic, folks. This is the bodhisattvas who come and protect us, who come and help the hungry ghosts, and the 4 kings who protect us from harm. And so we bring forth and we call forth the hungry ghosts, and then we politely send them away after this is over, which is an important part, so they don't hang around. Because much as we, you know, kind of like these little guys, you know, we think they're kind of funny, we don't really want them bouncing around our house, do we? Any more than we have to have them bounce around at our house, like in the form of us. But anyway, so we send these little guys away. Zip, off they go. So we're going to do this ritual, and I hope that everybody online and everybody here, that we all stay. And again, I am really looking forward to this song that the Sanghas are going to do for us. And you remember Jaku often, when she does a Segaki lecture, she talks about Milarepa in the cave and how the demons come and you can't get rid of them, can't get rid of them, can't get rid of them. Finally makes friends with them. So that's what their song is about. I think it's really cool. Okay, so we're going to take a little break here, and then we'll start. Oh, actually, yeah. How about a little Q&A here for a few minutes, and then we'll go.